Welcome back to season 2 of Energetically You, where we talk all things healthy habits, abundant mindset, and optimal wellness. I'm your host, Megan Swan, a mindset and wellness coach. I love helping women optimize their wellness through plant-based nutrition, movement, mindfulness, and mindset practices that having them feel more aligned with who they truly are and confident in their own skin. I'm the creator of the Sustainable Integrated Wellness Approach. I am also living in Mexico, and I have been for the last 12 years. At 30, I sold everything and went on my own eat, pray, love journey, if you will. And now at 42, I'm still on my first stop, loving life and feeling more empowered than ever before. This podcast is for incredible humans who are interested in feeling more aligned with who they truly are, confident in their own skin, and able to make more empowered decisions for themselves going forward in their future. So let's dive in. Welcome back to Energetically You. Today, I'm thrilled to have a chat with my good friend, David Clemen. He is a long-term recovery enthusiast. He has started a podcast called the Recovery Nuggets Podcast, which I have been on. And we got to talking. We share a lot of knowledge in terms of the power of journaling. But we got to talking one day and he revealed that he'd had this other major life transformation more recently. And I thought that it would be very interesting to dive into that. So that will be the bulk of our conversation. I will link up his sobriety story on the Sober Diaries podcast in the show notes. So if you want to hear more on that part of his life, it is an excellent episode. You can listen to it on Nate's podcast, and we'll be diving right in. Welcome, David. I'm so thrilled that we get to chat today. I'm really just curious on a personal level to hear the saga of the second transformation. I was in the introduction talking about how you're in long-term recovery. So if you want to maybe like very briefly tell the audience about that, and if they want to get more into that, your podcast is an amazing resource because you talk a lot about it in your episodes. And then we'll get into the second transformation that you kind of dropped on me the other day that I find so fascinating, and I'm curious to get into that too. So welcome. How are you? First off, good afternoon.
Thank you, Megan. I'm doing well. Grateful to be on the podcast. And recovery's like, you start out on one path, but it opens up many different doors that we can recover in other areas. You know what I mean? And so, my recovery journey started in 2001. That was the first time I got clean, but it was for all the wrong reasons. Basically, I was doing it for family and friends, and I wasn't ready yet. Mm-hmm. And so I actually went back out and kept drinking and using and all that. And then it took me almost 4 years to get to the point where I was sick of it, and then I was doing it for myself. And so that's kind of the short story of it. That last day in July of 2006, that was the journey of this new path. And as far as like what we're talking about today, as far as food and a body transformation, I grew up with parents that were, they're hardworking, and basically we were meat and potatoes families. There was always sugars and cakes and treats around, and I was a latchkey kid. So from the jump, I always had soda around. And I can remember early on as soda and sweets were kind of my way to cope with everything I was dealing with. So I still struggle with those things, even though I've transformed my body in the past couple of years, and that's really where it started, was way back, way before drugs or alcohol or emotional eating. It just was around. And so you don't really question it. I grew up in the 70s. We just, it was like Little Debbie snack cakes, sugary cereals before breakfast. And I was thinking about, since we were going to be on here today, I was thinking about a story of when I was a kid. I knew how far the telephone cord was for when my mom would be on the phone. Mm. And back then, Hershey's chocolate came in a can where you would punch a hole in each side of it to put it on ice cream and so forth. And so I just remember this one time I got far enough out of her range of the length of the cord, and I just was drinking the Hershey's chocolate syrup because I was so addicted to sugar back then. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I mean, it's just, it was ingrained from very early on that sugar and sweets make everything better. And that's really where the addiction to that came in. And I can go on from there of how in the past couple of years, my body transformation took over. In 2019, I had gotten through a divorce, and I really was kind of lost for a while after the divorce. And, I was in recovery, so my old coping tools, alcohol and drugs, weren't there anymore. I was living alone. And so in a sense, I just was eating myself into a kind of a bigger version as a way of protection, because I wasn't engaging with life anymore. And I had a lot of guilt and shame about what went on in the divorce, and then how I felt about myself. And I took it as it was personal to me what happened, but it wasn't. It was about her, and that's okay. But I didn't initially start there, and so I just was eating all the pain. I mean, I was literally
numbing it.
I was making myself super unhealthy because of the pain, and I was using food to do it.
Mm-hmm. So was there like a big spike in your weight at that point?
Well, eventually towards the end of 2019, I got up to 268 pounds, which for me was really large because I was always an athlete in high school and even in college. I always weighed around 175 or 180. And it's not about the number so much, but for me, I know how clothes fit on me at certain weights and how I felt about myself. Mm-hmm. So there's that thing where I'm seeing this huge number. And then at the end of December of 2019, my doctor was basically like, you got to do something or you're going on blood pressure, cholesterol medicine. And, most people don't get off of that once they get there. So basically I quit soda, and this was right before the pandemic. Did good for a few months, and then the pandemic hit, and my girlfriend and I, we were doing well for that first month in, and then it was like, well, whatever. I mean, here we are. We're back to the old habits of sugar and cake and lots of good fats, supposedly. But when you eat too many good fats, it's kind of counterproductive. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And I had to get sick of it towards the end of that summer to really to just make a huge change. And the catalyst was my mom called me and said, "Have you seen your cousin lately?" And I said, "No, why? What's up?" And she said, "Well, she lost 55 pounds. And I'm like, "What?" So I reached out to her through Messenger, right? And I said, "Well, what are you doing?" And she said, "Well, I got a coach and I'm doing this food program." And so that was the catalyst. And then we started on this food program where it's basically portion control, and you eat every 3 hours, but you're eating smaller portions, cut out the sugary drinks, lots of water, and then it was coming off slowly. So it was only coming off like 2 or 3 pounds at a time, but it was more sustainable, but I never really felt hungry, and as soon as I would feel hungry, that 3 hours would be up, and then I would eat the next shake or bar and so forth. And then, but also there was tracking involved, and there's a book that came with the program where you were literally looking at your triggers and why you ate those things. So, it was kind of
I was going to ask.
Yeah, it was kind of and also they had online groups where you could share tips with recipes and things like that. So it made a huge difference. And so I've maintained it, except for this past holidays. I definitely partook in the all the goodies, but I definitely feel a lot better.
And so am I correct? I remember you lost 90 pounds in what, 2 years?
Yeah, well, 90 pounds total, yeah. And then now I'm still about 75 down. I put about 15 pounds back on, but I'm maintaining that. And it's wild. It's just wild to know that once I got so sick of it, once again, in relation to recovery or transformation, I'm the type that I almost have to get sick of it before I'll do something. I wish I wasn't that way, but I just, the pain almost has to get great enough, and I have to get the gift of desperation before I'll make a change. I admire people that can say, "Oh, wow, this is getting a little off track at, this little problem," but that's just not how I've been. You
like to take it to extremes.
You're right. Right.
So did you have that clarity on, the root of the problem in your childhood and the numbing and all that? Was that something that you were already aware of, or did this program really crystallize that for you?
I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, I've always been an emotional eater. I would come home from school and walk in the door and eat 3 Little Debbie snack cakes, like right out of it just before the book bag was really even down. And I don't know if it was because I was socially anxious or just I would get so worked up about things at school and then worrying about, when Dad was going to come home, if I had my chores done, because Dad was pretty strict, so I had a lot of anxiety there. And, the food was the easiest and the most accepted way of dealing with things for me. It's not like, it's like, oh, well, you had a bad day, have a piece of cake, or here's some soda, or, you know what I mean? It just is like, it's kind of this
overt, or that was more like a modeled thing that you adopted?
I think I just adopted it. It really
and back then, like I grew up in the similar, it's like really when the food industry had like carte blanche to target kids specifically, and all the things that went along with that. The box cereal, everything being colored with different dyes and like very strategically marketed to kids who were, latchkey kids sitting at home watching a lot of TV. And I think that the greater problem is that it all seemed so innocent until we're now decades into that. And there's just like a massive, massive problem, not only in the US, I'd say it's really becoming a more global thing. And I feel like, what's your take on, because here where I live in Mexico, there is a serious lack of education in terms of just the soda or the pop. I say in Canada, here they say refresco. Yeah. Basically liquid sugar. And it, it's slightly worse when it's carbonated, but really there's so many things that pretend to be healthier, such as juices and all these sports drinks. But essentially the problem is liquid sugar with absolutely no fiber. If you're not spending that energy right immediately, it just immediately gets converted to fat and causes all sorts of problems on hormones. I mean, it's like really where you start to getting into trouble. So was that something that you were always aware that it was really bad for you, or that's kind of like a newer appreciation?
Well, it's a newer appreciation, but it's also a part of, like, when I was younger and I played basketball and I was athletic, it didn't really matter. Most of us have that thing where it didn't matter what I ate because I could burn it off and I was always active. As I got older, it was like 5 pounds a year extra for 20 years. And then all of a sudden you're like, how did I get here? Life, drugs, alcohol, recovery, a divorce, all this stuff. And you look in the mirror one day and you go, what happened? And, but as far as what you're talking about with the refined sugar and the sugary syrupy drinks, the information's out there. But for me, there's a part of it that it always just tasted good, and it's made for you to taste good and crave it, and so to break that habit was probably harder than any. It's
Yeah.
just
Would you
so
say that surprises you? Because I mean, they say that sugar, there's all these with rats and like comparing sugar and cocaine and heroin, all these
right.
things. And I mean, I'm quite honestly, that's kind of my remaining vice, if you will, as well as sugar.
Yeah.
So have you like kind of drilled down on that for yourself? Like kind of being amazed that it's really comparable with, it's like any other drug essentially.
Yeah, and they've done scans of the brain, and the same area of the brain is lit up by sugar and cocaine.
Yeah.
The scans are in the exact same place; they're lit up. So, it's no wonder that it's so hard to break that part of that cycle. And it's it seems that the sugary drinks are one of the worst ways, like you were saying, to get calories into your body, because they don't process very well. We're not designed to process those.
Mm-hmm. So what have you, like, do you feel now that you're at a place where you don't need to be as vigilant, or is it like all other recovery that you feel like, it's kind of like an all or nothing, or, like what are your strategies around staying, and do you look at it as a weight thing, or do you focus on how you feel or how your clothes fit?
Well, it's a little bit of all of that, but one thing I noticed towards the end of drinking all the soda was I was starting to get headaches, and I wasn't feeling good, and the soda really bloats your stomach. It doesn't matter if it's regular soda or the ones that are diet with the aspartame. The aspartame really seems to be worse for making your stomach bigger. And then also noticing that my joints and the inflammation from those sugary drinks, I just don't feel good when I'm drinking those. And so with the transformation of really focusing on drinking the water and really staying hydrated, you really start to notice how much better you actually feel. And so that makes it a little bit easier to say, you know what, if I do this consistently, I will feel better consistently, and my clothes will feel better, they're kind of like non-scale victories. You're not on the scale, but you're literally feeling better, and you have these little victories. I gave away 8 bags of clothes to the Goodwill that were double XL, and now I'm wearing large shirts and 36 pants, where I was up to 42 and 44s. So wow. The benefits were huge.
Yeah.
And that kind of keeps it kind of reinforces what I'm doing is working, and it's building confidence and self-esteem, and kind of getting back to being in my body how I was used to it when I was younger.
So let's talk a little bit about journaling, because it's a passion that we both share. And I know it's been really a big part of your recovery, and it's I don't think it's daily or almost daily routine.
Yeah.
So you do morning pages, or what do you do? Or various?
Yeah, I do morning pages, and I learned that I did the Artist Way. I don't know if you've heard of that.
It's on my list to read this year.
Yeah. So Julia Cameron, she wrote the Artist Way probably in the 80s, and now this past weekend I finished the 3rd book, and it gives you assignments to really get through creative blocks as an artist or a creative person as well. So the idea is to write 3 pages every morning consistently, no matter if you have anything to write about, or if you're pissed off, or you feel good, or you want to write goals. It doesn't really matter. It's more about the accountability to yourself first, because, as we go on in life, we have jobs, we have relationships. Some of us had children. Some of us are sponsoring people, are active in recovery. We can get so busy with doing and not really take time for ourselves, whereas the journal is always there to listen and not judge. You can have a little moment with your partner, and it's like, oh, I want to write this down and talk about it, and then revisit the next day and say, well, I communicated how I felt here, and it went like this. And so again, the journal doesn't judge how it went or whatever, but at least I'm being heard in a sense, and not being judged for if I was upset about this thing, or if something, like we have a neighbor that's kind of a pain in the butt. I can talk junk about the neighbor, in the journal, and it doesn't hurt anybody's feelings, but I can kind of get it off of me.
Mm-hmm.
And
Process
then,
it now.
yeah. And then when I go into my day, I've kind of cleared the chitter chatter first, and then I can come back to it the next day. And then, I look forward to it. It just took practice to get the consistency of it.
How long did it take you to really make it a non-negotiable?
Well, I started the Artist Way in January of 2020, and this is actually after I had really started to get focused on my health, and then I did EMDR to really get unstuck from the pain of the divorce. And then I had always wanted to do the Artist Way. In fact, I got the book when I was in college, and I graduated in 95. But it's
one of those books that's like been staring at you for 20 years.
Yeah. Oh, I should do that. It's like we should all over ourselves, and so I'm like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do this Artist Way finally. And that was one of the first things she suggested as part of the program. So I just dove into it, and then we got locked down. So I wasn't working for a month. So it kind of was like the universe conspired to help me get into a new rhythm of journaling.
Mm. Can you talk a little bit about how having more clarity around journaling or in general has affected you as an artist? Because there's a lot of stereotypes around artists that there's sort of like, I don't know, that part of the creativity comes from sort of a place of melancholy or craziness, or, like an alternative lifestyle that's, not necessarily, doesn't need to be that way. So what has been your experience, and do you kind of like have you found like a sober artistic community, or is that even important to you?
Well, that's a good topic, because actually in that book, and well, I'll even back up. I used to do art because I love to do art. Then it became a thing where I knew I could get attention from it. And then once I kind of got off the path with drugs and alcohol, I did fancy myself as a crazy artist and became like this, I'm a legend, but it was a legend in my own mind. Nobody really was worried about with the crazy stuff I was doing, but it got so far away from just the love of the art. And by journaling, what it helped me do was be consistent. When you're fancying yourself as like this crazy, temperamental artist, you focus more on the going out and being crazy than the actual work. Yet the journaling is a methodical kind of like consistent, disciplined practice, which once I started, I sold so much artwork that year during pandemic, and then after George Floyd, because I did these unity prints that were imagery of all different figures of different skin tones, but the heart was all the same color. And then I was doing masks I got my illustration printed on fabric of the same thing, and then was selling masks. And so they went all over the place. And so it opened up it was the conduit to open me back up just to doing art, because I loved it and really expressing myself from a place of love and not ego. And so it was a huge paradigm shift for why I do art. And it's kind of like full circle coming home to, I just love to draw and create beautiful images and share the art as well. Yeah.
I love that full circle. So how young were you when you first fell in love with art?
I was probably 4 or 5. My parents, as an only child, so if they just gave me paper and pencils, I was fine. They didn't have to entertain me at all. I would just sit in my room and draw for hours. And so fortunately in middle school and along the way, I had art teachers that saw that I could draw and I was interested in art. And I'm very fortunate that from high school to college, I had teachers that took me under their wing and really supported me and pushed me to continue doing it. Yeah.
So if you're looking back over your life and you kind of see the sort of healthier layers, I don't know if you think of like taking them off or adding them on, was for you, is this like this sort of waterfall effect that it makes sense that everything just keeps realigning, or were there some sort of major hiccups that caught you off guard, that surprised you that along the way?
I think I was very surprised that when I got off the path of the person that I actually am, that people they weren't buying it anymore. Like they weren't buying the kind of questionable decisions I was making and this wild child persona that I had kind of come up with. I was operating from a place of ego, and so it wasn't being returned because people were seeing that. And so now, when I do art, I do it because I love it again, and it's received much better and it's more relatable. People, I used to do these when I was at my darkest. I was doing these really dark abstract paintings and putting these crazy prices on them, and no one could relate to what I was putting out there. And so recently I really haven't done a lot of artwork because I've been so focused on the podcast, and even doing the journaling helped me switch my focus from art to doing the podcast and sharing my voice as a human being, and sharing conversations and things that are either even deeper and matters of the heart, and really getting to conversations that can help another person realize they're not alone. There is help. And so that's been a big shift for me, because I'm still being creative with the topics and putting the Instagram posts up and, working on it and using my voice and communication with other people. And, art can be a lonely kind of proposition sometimes, because it's just you and the canvas or the paper. Whereas stepping into this space with, you and other people in the recovery sphere, I'm meeting new people that are out there putting themselves out there to help others.
Yeah. So essentially, in terms of your art, when you came back to sort of your most authentic self, or maybe more connected to your most authentic self, it felt fluid again. And what was the spark? Was there one thing that really made you want to start the podcast and focus on creating in that sphere? Because it's an art in itself, really.
Yeah. Well, so once the pandemic started, all the meetings, the 12-step meetings in my area shut down in person. Mm-hmm. And I had used Zoom a couple of times, and I just called people in my network and I said, I'm going to start a meeting. I'm not really sure how it's going to go. And so we are actually celebrating our 2-year anniversary this month. And we've had people from New York to Baltimore, down to Savannah, Georgia, Pennsylvania, California, who are regular members now. And so what I started to see was that between that and the online community and Instagram, I was like, 12-step worked for me, but I'm also seeing people such as yourself and others find recovery and find a way to not destroy themselves anymore. And there's not just one way. So why not do a podcast and talk about these things openly? And it doesn't have to be anonymous. It can be out in the open to help break the stigma. And so I realized that, like, all those years I was bumping my head trying to be this artist, maybe I wasn't on the right path. Maybe I had to go through all that to get to where I'm at, and then be able to share more of a human experience that other people can relate to and get something out of. And so that's really was the catalyst, because I was journaling about it. I'm like, I see myself on a new creative path, but I'm not sure what it is, but I'm just going to keep putting it into the universe. And I had a podcast before that was just more of it was called Eclectic Guests, where I would have different artists and musicians and yoga teachers and things like that. But it was tough getting guests to my house all the time. Whereas Zoom opened it up. I mean, you're in Mexico, I'm here. It's a lot easier, right? So it's just kind of like you said, it's just like this waterfall of opportunity opening up, and it's been really great.
Can you talk just a little bit more about, because you're in long-term recovery and there's sometimes like there's many groups in recovery, but mm-hmm. I too have found Instagram to be a really good place to connect with people. And that's really only been in this past year. And mm-hmm. I'll be celebrating 4 years on Friday, actually.
Awesome.
Thank you. And so it was kind of, because I never had the experience of going to a meeting. I had a vague understanding through various books I'd read, but that there is a maybe difference of opinion on the anonymity or the protection of the community versus, just being really open, almost mm-hmm. loud on Instagram and celebrating out loud. So is that something like if at first you kind of had to reconcile, or was it pretty easy to see both?
Well, that's an interesting topic because, the 12-step groups have what they call traditions, and the anonymity is really to protect the people that are in the meetings from being outed in maybe say their community. So for example, say you have a prominent doctor, lawyer, or really anyone, and they just want to be able to go to a meeting and get the help they need without the community knowing that, right? Because you really need a safe space to do it, because there still is a stigma, regardless of whether we're breaking the stigma or whatever. We still need a safe space to recover. And so, I don't promote which one I go to. I just say 12-step, and that's keeping in line with the traditions, because part of the traditions is that we don't promote these groups. It's really more of an attraction rather than promotion type deal. Mm-hmm. And so for me though, I just felt like I don't need to be totally anonymous that I'm in recovery, because I share my story with people if it comes up. And so there is a kind of a line there that if I'm outside of the groups, I don't mind talking about it at all. But there are some people that, they want to recover safely and not have everyone that knows them know about it. So I think there is some nuance to this idea of anonymity. In terms of 12-step, it's pretty clear that we don't break other people's anonymity if they're in the groups. Mm-hmm. There are some people that their only connection to any help is through Instagram. Mm-hmm. And so if that's how they're finding it, I think that's great. And if it leads them down a path, because it's kind of like we're on this path, these different paths of self-discovery and learning and trying new ways to get better. And a lot of recovery is unlearning. I had to unlearn conditioning that was taught to me by people that they were misinformed as well. And they kind of passed their shame and trauma on to me. Mm-hmm. But as far as the only thing that it's not that I take issue with it. I just think it's a slippery slope for early recovery. And there's a lot of people in early recovery on Instagram. This promotion of non-alcoholic drinks at bars, I literally just figured out that I want to quit drinking, but I'm going to keep going to the bars, but just drink non-alcoholic drinks. I think it's a tough place to be if you literally can't stop drinking for one day. But this notion of promoting, I'm not saying they're bad if you've been around for a while and you can you have these systems where you don't drink and you're safe and you can leave if you want. But I think it can be a little dicey for a newcomer. That's just my trepidation about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think there's lots of...
it's like they say, if you sit in a barber shop long enough, you'll probably get a haircut. You know what I mean? So if you just learned how to quit drinking, and it was a big problem, but you just going to put yourself there and just have a seltzer or water in the first 30 days, I don't know if that's the best advice or suggestion. That's just me. That's my take on it. Because at Christmas, I went to a bar to get a gift certificate from my boss, And that's where you have to get the gift card, is you have to stand at the bar and get it from the bartender. I'm almost 16 years clean and sober. And it was a festive mood, and my old favorite drink was on the counter, and I was staring at it longer than I should have been. And I know what I was feeling. I'm like, man, that thing looks good. And that's with a lot of recovery and a lot of work, so I just feel like, we have to be careful of the messages we send, especially to people early in recovery. And I'm not being judgmental. I'm just saying from experience, it's not something I would promote. That's all. And some of those non-alcoholic drinks look great. I would try them today, but since there's so much early recovery and sobriety, I think we just have to be careful with the messages we put out there. That's all. But overall, I think it's great that there is this online community of people talking about these issues.
Yeah, well, I think we can draw a parallel there. Like, as you're describing, like looking at the drink, like I think people that are suffering with emotional eating can really kind of relate to the same. Yeah. It's the same idea. Like if you're, the number one thing that I suggest to clients who want to shift, either whether it be, less gluten or, clean up their diet in some shape or form, or all the shapes and form or whatever, you need to set yourself up to succeed. And so in the very beginning, when it's still an addiction, and I'm very happy or, willing to say that I have an addiction to sugar to this day, if I have it in the house, it's going to get consumed. Whereas if it's not in the house, it's only a matter of like, how quickly is it going to get consumed? And I think it's the same. I think you can apply that same thing to, and there's, so many people that feel the same way. I'll continue applying it to sugar. So there are lots of people that really get off of, or, lose a lot of weight, for example, using another supplement or something that has like a different alternative or artificial sweetener, instead of just reconsidering like how sweet their palate needs to be overall, And so, like you say, it can quickly become a slippery slope, and everybody's different, and you need to find what works for you. But I think in the very beginning, it's certainly easier if you kind of take yourself out of environments that are very triggering and familiar to whatever it is you're trying to get rid of. Or
and I would add that one thing that I've learned, life goes on. So sometimes you do have to go to an event in early sobriety. Is that if you have to go, like say it's a wedding, that's an easy one. Everyone's going to have to go to a wedding or whatever. Take a friend and create some type of hand signal that's real subtle. And if you feel uncomfortable where you feel like you're either going to drink or someone's forcing a drink at you, whatever, you can easily just say, if I tap my wrist or scratch my ear, that means I want to go outside and get some fresh air. And then the other person's already in on it. It doesn't have to be a big deal. You can go out, get away, just kind of talk about where you're at. And I mean, sometimes you just have to leave, my recovery is my responsibility. So if I can set up certain things to do and protect myself, it's worth it because it's my responsibility. Ultimately. Yeah.
So last question, can you kind of thread together the, in your opinion, in the early days of whatever your like habit you're trying to change, is it more of a physical thing? And then, the reflection and the journaling and, essentially just feeling better about yourself comes in? Or do those things really happen at the same time?
Wow, that's a good question. I think that, the obsession in the beginning is one of the toughest things to break out of. And I think that's why the connection with others and getting busy, I don't think it's, for me, I don't know that it would have been good if I just stopped and just sat at the house. That's why for me, the meetings were helpful because it gave me some accountability. And then I was able to do the opposite of the last days of my addiction, which was isolate. So by going out and being around other people that were in the same mindset of really letting go and walking away from booze and drugs.
Well, it was the same with the food, no? Did you
same with the food,
there was a community.
Yeah, and there's a community and connection, and being able to say, wow, I was obsessing over ordering pizza again today, and or whatever that is. I really wanted a soda today or whatever, and someone go, man, me too. And then in that moment, it loses its power in a sense, because we're, it's like our secrets keep us kind of feeling like they're way bigger than they are, yet pain shared is pain lessened. As soon as I tell you that I feel bad about that I'm obsessing over this sugary stuff, and your friend goes, I was too, but you know what? I had a big glass of water. It went away and I got through it, but I can't do that by myself. I can't share that kind of stuff by myself. So the connection to me is huge. And then it kind of builds its own momentum. The more consistent you are with it and the more open you are with others, your struggles, and then they share tips with you as well.
Yeah. I love that. Demystifying your secrets and giving them less power. I think that's a really great insight that I'm going to take away from this.
Yeah.
So tell everyone where they find your podcast and, sure. What you're focusing on these days.
Sure. It's recoverynuggetspodcast.com. It's the same handle on Instagram at Recovery Nuggets Podcast. And, I've got an author coming up this week that I'm recording with. She wrote a book called Trauma and the 12 Steps, Dr. Jamie Marich. So I've recorded another one with an EMDR counselor. So a lot of the stuff is really looking at trauma and also, people's stories in recovery. And
I found all the stories really interesting. You always learn something new from somebody's story.
Yeah. Yeah. You hear a little recovery nugget, if it will, as it were. And you were actually the first guest that I interviewed on the show. So I'm appreciative for you. I was so nervous to record an interview with someone. So that was great.
Oh, I didn't sense it. You seemed like a pro. So, but thank you for having me. And, I think I don't even remember what my quote unquote nugget was. I probably should have prepared that better, but anyway, it's now out in the internet sphere.
The season finale, I'm going to take all the recovery nuggets from the first season and put them into just one episode. I'm just going to have short clips.
So then I'll be able to hear what it is.
Yeah, you'll be able to hear it again. Yeah. So, well, this has been fun. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. And we'll share all the links in the show notes. And anything else you wanted to leave our audience with?
The thing that I've learned the most is that you have to have self-compassion. Give yourself a break. It's like when I got clean, I had to work on so much stuff. And it went from financial to self-esteem to, it's just a myriad of things. But the longer that I wasn't using anymore or drinking, I had the opportunity to get better and then be more compassionate towards myself. And in turn, I'm able to be more compassionate with others. So give yourself a break and just keep on the path.
Love it. All right. We'll leave it there and we'll be in touch.
All right. Thanks, Megan.
Thank you so much for listening to Energetically You. I hope that this episode has helped you to tune into your natural energy sources so that you feel more energized and focused throughout your day. If you enjoyed the episode, please take a second to rate and review. Each review helps us to help more ambitious women just like you accomplish their goals. Don't forget to take a screenshot, share it on social or in your Instagram stories, and tag me at Megan Swan Wellness. See you soon.